Look at the people around you, your father, your grandfather, maybe even yourself. Millions of people spend billions of dollars every year trying to stop one thing from happening: hair loss. Some blame genetics, others blame stress. Some buy expensive shampoos, others fly across the world for hair transplants. But here's the strange part. If losing your hair is such a terrible trait, why didn't evolution get rid of it? After all, humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. If baldness truly reduced survival, those genes should have slowly disappeared. Instead, they became incredibly common. So, what happened? To answer that question, we have to go back to a world where mirrors didn't exist, hair products didn't exist, and nobody cared if their hairline was receding. Imagine standing around a campfire 40,000 years ago. Not because you're traveling through time, but because that's where almost every human who ever lived spent their evenings. You aren't checking your reflection. There isn't one. No bathroom mirror, no phone camera, no barber asking, "So, what are we doing today?" The only thing you're worried about is whether tomorrow you'll find enough food to survive another week. That's one of the biggest differences between ancient humans and us. Today, appearance occupies an enormous part of our lives. We take selfies, style our hair, watch tutorials, spend hours trying to look younger. Ancient humans had a much simpler priority: stay alive. If your hair looked terrible but you could still hunt, you were doing just fine. And that changes the entire story, because evolution doesn't care whether you look attractive in a profile picture. It cares whether you survive long enough to pass on your genes. Those are two very different goals. Which brings us to another question. Why do humans have hair in the first place? After all, compared to almost every other mammal, we're surprisingly bald already. Chimpanzees are covered in thick hair. Gorillas are covered in thick hair. Even tiny monkeys living in tropical forests wear what looks like a permanent winter coat. Humans don't. Most of our bodies are covered only by tiny, nearly invisible hairs. So somewhere during our evolution, we lost most of it. Scientists believe this happened hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of years before modern humans appeared. One leading idea is surprisingly simple. Our ancestors became endurance runners. Unlike cheetahs or wolves, humans don't rely on incredible speed. Instead, we rely on something much stranger. We keep going. Imagine chasing an antelope across the African savanna. Not for 1 minute, not for 10, for hours. The animal sprints away, stops to rest. You keep walking. It runs again. You keep walking. Eventually, the antelope overheats. You don't. This strategy is called persistence hunting, and humans became astonishingly good at it. But there's a problem. Running for hours under the African sun while wearing a thick fur coat is a terrible idea. Your body generates enormous amounts of heat. If that heat can't escape, your organs begin to fail. So evolution found another solution. Instead of keeping thick fur, humans developed millions of sweat glands. As sweat evaporates, it cools the body. It's one of the most efficient cooling systems in the animal kingdom. But it only works properly if thick fur isn't trapping all that moisture. So over countless generations, humans became less hairy. Not completely bald, just hairless enough to become extraordinary long-distance runners, which means something fascinating. The reason you can comfortably jog on a hot summer day might exist because your ancestors spent hundreds of thousands of years chasing animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. But here's the interesting part. If losing body hair was such an advantage, why did we keep the hair on top of our heads? After all, if less hair helps cool the body, shouldn't evolution have removed all of it? It didn't, and for a very good reason. Imagine standing beneath the African sun at midday. No hat, no shade, no sunscreen. Just hours of direct sunlight hitting the top of your head. Your brain is one of the most heat-sensitive organs in your body. It doesn't like overheating. Head hair acts like a natural umbrella. It blocks part of the sun's radiation, creates shade above the scalp, and helps reduce how quickly your head heats up. In other words, while losing body hair helped cool the body, keeping hair on your head helped protect the organ that mattered most, your brain. And that protection didn't stop there. Your eyebrows stop sweat from dripping into your eyes. Your eyelashes help keep dust and insects away. Even tiny facial hairs can provide useful sensory information. Almost every hair we kept stayed for a reason, which makes one question even more mysterious. If scalp hair is so useful, why do millions of people slowly lose it anyway? Because the answer has almost nothing to do with hair itself. It has everything to do with timing. When most people think about hair loss, they imagine something suddenly going wrong, a disease, a deficiency, a sign that something is broken. But for the vast majority of men experiencing hair loss, that's not actually what's happening. The most common form of baldness is called androgenetic alopecia. Despite the intimidating name, it's incredibly common, and it revolves around one tiny molecule, a hormone called DHT. DHT is a modified form of testosterone. It plays an important role during development, helping shape many male characteristics. But later in life, it can have an unexpected side effect. In people who carry certain genetic variants, hair follicles on the scalp become increasingly sensitive to DHT. Every time a new hair grows, the follicle becomes just a little smaller. The next hair grows thinner, then thinner again, until eventually it stops producing visible hair altogether. Here's the strange part. The hair follicles aren't dead. They're still there. They're simply producing hairs so tiny you barely notice them, which explains why bald heads often aren't completely hairless at all. The hairs have simply become microscopic. Now, here's the evolutionary mystery. If these genes eventually reduce hair growth, why didn't natural selection remove them? To answer that, we have to think like evolution. Imagine two prehistoric men living 40,000 years ago. The first begins losing noticeable hair at 45. The second keeps a full head of hair until he dies. Which one passes on more genes? At first glance, you'd probably say the second one, except that's not necessarily true. In prehistoric societies, life expectancy was much lower than it is today. Many people died from infections, accidents, predators, or starvation long before reaching old age. More importantly, most people had children long before significant hair loss ever appeared. By the time a man's hairline started moving backward, he often already had sons, daughters, maybe even grandchildren. From evolution's perspective, the mission had already been accomplished. Your genes had been passed on. Natural selection is incredibly powerful, but it mainly acts on traits that affect reproduction. A genetic mutation that prevents someone from having children, evolution usually removes it quickly. A trait that appears decades after children are already born, evolution barely notices. Think about it. Hunting skill mattered. Finding food mattered. Escaping predators mattered. Protecting your family mattered. Whether your hairline had moved back a few inches, probably not. Imagine a hunter returning to camp carrying enough meat to feed 20 people. Would anyone refuse to share the meal because he had a bald spot? Almost certainly not. Competence mattered. Experience mattered. Survival mattered. Hair? Not nearly as much. Now, compare that to today. A modern man may notice his first signs of hair loss before turning 30. Within weeks, he's searching online, reading forums, watching transformation videos, buying shampoos, ordering supplements, considering medications. Some even travel across the world for hair transplant surgery. None of those options existed for ancient humans. In fact, many prehistoric people probably had no idea they were gradually losing hair. They couldn't watch it happen. There were no mirrors hanging inside caves, no bathroom lights, no front-facing cameras. The only reflection they occasionally saw was a distorted image floating on the surface of a river. And rivers aren't exactly known for giving perfect hairline updates. This highlights something fascinating about modern life. Today, we don't just experience aging, we constantly watch ourselves aging. Every photograph, every video call, every mirror, every social media post, we're exposed to our own appearance hundreds of times every week. Ancient humans weren't. Their appearance mattered mainly when interacting with other people. Ours follows us everywhere. But there may be another reason baldness survived, and this is where things become much more speculative. Some scientists have suggested that hair loss might have served as a visual signal of age, maturity, or social status. Think about many traditional societies. Older individuals often carried something younger people didn't: experience. They knew where water could be found during droughts. They remembered migration routes. They recognized dangerous plants. They settled disputes. Knowledge could keep an entire group alive. Looking older wasn't always a disadvantage. Sometimes it inspired trust. Now, to be clear, scientists still debate these ideas. There isn't strong evidence proving baldness evolved as a deliberate social signal. It remains one possible explanation among several. Evolution is messy. Sometimes traits survive because they help, sometimes because they don't hurt enough to disappear, and sometimes simply because they're linked to other genes that provide important advantages. The human genome isn't a collection of isolated switches. It's more like an enormous web. Changing one thread can affect dozens of others, which means evolution often accepts small trade-offs if the overall result is beneficial. But there's another twist most people never think about. Women almost always keep much more scalp hair than men. Why? If losing hair were completely random, you'd expect both sexes to experience it equally. They don't, and that difference may reveal one of the most important clues of all. Of course, scientists don't believe baldness exists because evolution was trying to make people look older or wiser. The real answer is probably much simpler. Hair loss usually appears after the years that mattered most for reproduction. By then, evolution had already accomplished its goal. Your genes had already been passed on. And evolution doesn't optimize for looking young forever. It optimizes for leaving descendants. That's an important difference. Modern life has turned hair into part of our identity. We judge ourselves through mirrors, photographs, and social media every single day. Ancient humans didn't. They were judged by whether they could find food, protect their families, and survive another winter. A receding hairline rarely changed any of that. So why do humans lose hair? Not because evolution failed, but because evolution was solving a completely different problem than the one we care about today. The biggest question isn't why evolution didn't stop baldness. It's why we expect evolution to care about appearances in the first place.